The San Luis Valley is in an area that we call or refer to as the borderlands of southern Colorado. That area is also, overlaid by land that has been occupied and traveled through by several indigenous communities really for thousands of years. The valley is at the very northern edge of early Spanish settlement, and it's where that meets American westward expansion. And so it's a space of convergence, it's a space where people have come together, sometimes in really beautiful and amazing ways, sometimes in really tragic and complicated ways.
To walk around a place like this and not necessarily feel a sense of agency as a person of color, I guess feeling some resonance or seeing how my history, my life story connects to some of these local stories is what attracts me. I never imagined myself collaborating with a historical society, but I enjoy a good story.
I think one of the stories that is undertold when we talk about the West is the story of African Americans in the West. The history of black cowboys, the history of Buffalo Soldiers. This project aims to, shine a light on African American contributions to the West. Many Buffalo Soldiers were formerly enslaved before they joined the service, and so it's a story as well about freedom and aspiration and resilience, while also again looking at that complexity and the role that they were often asked to play being on the front lines of the removal of indigenous people. And so this project hopes to really tell the full story.
Most of them we'll never know their names or their voices or their stories, and so I'm here in hopes of bringing some of that reimagining, some of that texture to the now.
It was, for me, really exciting to see him include my perspective, the Navajo perspective, into this narrative. And so what that does is it really addresses a lot of the issues around borderlands and how we see and perceive what boundaries are, and then also the effects of those boundaries.
Art is about dealing with the contradictions. It's not about, creating a world that we already know, or creating a world that supports what we already feel and think. So I think the contradiction is essential.
My name is Johnny Taylor Valdez. My great-grandfather was John Taylor. He was a Buffalo Soldier and married the chief's daughter, Kitty Cloud. I never was a slave to anyone. I didn't have to fight for my freedom.
I was moved by the presentation of John Taylor Valdez, the great-grandchild of John Taylor. As an African-American person, learning about someone like John Taylor and just the contributions of people of color 150 years ago, gives me inspiration, gives me hope. Looking at what they dealt with and how they overcame it.
This press and all the little presses that operated in all the little towns in the West were almost always run by white people. And power comes from owning the press because you can set the narrative.
These newly freed black men joining the service and actually fighting for a country that actually had them enslaved. So there's kind of that interesting dynamic going on and how to maybe address that in my work.
The piece that I'm doing was working on today that I came up with when he was doing his prayer, had the refrain in it in a good way. I saw the poetry in it. Very simple, but if I can take that very simple line and complicate it with just a color.
We have people that will want to see Buffalo Soldier representations in a very stoic, clear fashion, one that's very reflective of their imagination of the past. I'm hoping that the artist can kind of distend that and stretch it out.
The land itself has been like a recorder of events. And you may see remnants of that pop up here now. You know, like things might be buried under the ground, you know. So we're still trying to figure out who we are as a people and why we're here, you know.
Looked around the press and thought for the project it would be amazing to have access to these resources from the period and to create work for this Buffalo Soldier exhibition using authentic material from the period, but to do kind of a remix of it.
You know, like the art could be a way of filling in gaps of history. You know, it could be a way of filling in missing pieces. And our lives are like that. When we try to figure out our past and present, our history, our family, you know, you want to try to fill in those gaps. So filling in the gaps of those stories and those things to piece yourself together. And you know, art has always been that way for me, piecing my life together.
John Taylor is my great-grandfather right here, the Buffalo Soldier and Civil War veteran who ended up marrying one of the chief's daughters, and she's over in the corner, and that's Kitty Cloud. The two families got together to, you know, arrange the marriage, and he had been in the Civil War, had already been a Buffalo Soldier, and had been an interpreter for the tribe for a long time. And so the reservation is 15 miles tall, and then it's 75 miles long. So technically we should have a little over 1 million acres, but we only have about 470,000 or something like that. And so we are, you know, we're honored to have two of our great-grandfathers here. So it's just amazing, you know, when you think about it, the history of those Civil War veterans that are here in this cemetery.
Knowing that they had a history of being former slaves, where the interaction primarily with land occurred working the land but not owning it, not engaging with the land in a way that was beneficial for them, and then coming out west and really seeing this completely different landscape, but also being asked to fight in Indian wars where Indians really were putting their lives down to maintain that relationship with the land.
Dear John Taylor, I have a question from the future looking back. Would you agree or disagree that Manifest Destiny was the architecture of doom? Peace, Theodore. So it was just the right amount of words for that space, blew it up.
It's the size of a person. I've identified a model who embodied the spirit of the sort of resonant meanings of Cathay Williams as someone who had pretended to be a man and ultimately served as the first female infantry person or any person serving in active duty in the military as a black woman.
This piece was inspired by the photograph you see at the entrance of the exhibit of John Taylor and Dick Buskin Charlie, but here I've taken the two images and joined them together by the legs, kind of like a play on this idea of this double consciousness or double identity, or these two people being in this area and the roles they have to play in the expansion of the Western frontier. So these two works is supposed to be kind of mounted on the wall, kind of like the wheelbase of a mountain bike. And as you can see, these two pieces were inspired by this photograph here. Kind of play on this idea I was saying earlier about this idea of double consciousness, where you're aware of your black identity, also your American identity. So you're living in these two worlds and trying to navigate that.
So this piece is the 25th Infantry of Buffalo Soldiers. The upper brass approved the possibility and experiment of using bicycles to transport troops.
And I was particularly interested in the portraiture of these soldiers and different characters that tell the story, collaging them, creating different context for them in terms of backgrounds.
I was interested in how different people related to land within this story. Photographers who came out west to try to encourage settlers, white settlers, to move out here.
I understand the still blue sky don't warm the bones of an uncooked country. What if the country is not a country but a dirt pile, waiting in our blood? I understand wanting to give in, the sleepless midnight, the beckoning star, the country, a civil stew of heat and unrest.
I created a series of missing posters and land for sale posters. The missing posters were really to address the history of missing and murdered Indigenous women from the beginning of colonization. The silhouette is of me, and I asked some colleagues and other friends to write descriptions of me if I went missing. I think my biggest hope for this show is for people to understand their role in this narrative. And I think people often, because of different types of privileges, can excuse themselves from roles. And, you know, I'm hoping that this exhibit will really ask people to figure out where they are on this continuum of shared land and shared space.